Topic for today is talking about kind of post-pandemic, post-COVID, when things come to a halt, shutdown, stay-at-home orders, how do businesses adapt? So I know that in looking at the demographics with Liz, most of the folks joining in today are small businesses, but I know there's a couple bigger companies. So I'll try to kind of focus on both groups and not too much small business. As we know, things that affect small business also affect big business, just in different ways, and vice versa. So I think, we can all agree that COVID was a little crazy. I like to kind of talk about crisis and chaos and things like that. I own Lexington Event Company and LexEffect Venues, which is a venue management company and an event planning company. Some folks like to say we are the coordinators of chaos. So if there's anything I know, it's change, and change with no notice, and immediate change that is followed by a more immediate change. I think there's some other folks in the event industry on here, so they can probably understand that. Not just with COVID. Obviously, COVID was a big crisis and a big change. There were so many unknowns. We didn't know when it would be over. We didn't know what the mandates were. We didn't know how our business would recover or how our paychecks would recover, mental health, things of that nature. So obviously, COVID was a big crisis, a lot of chaos, a lot of challenges, lots of confusion. But outside of COVID, I think as business owners, business professionals, business leaders, we can all agree that, there is crisis and chaos in other days that are non-COVID related as well. Potential bankruptcy or financial issues. You've lost a big client, you're having cash flow or budget problems, changes in partnerships or changes in ownership, employee turnover, things like that. I'm seeing some heads nodding. I think we can all agree that those things sometimes happen. They were made worse by COVID, sure, but they are regular occurrences in the business world. So, with crisis, it's not always a bad thing. It seems like it at the time sometimes, but, it can open our eyes to areas that need to be changed or need improvement. It gives us that nudge to make it happen. Sometimes it's not by choice. Employees quit. That's not our choice, although sometimes it might be our choice behind the scenes. But, bankruptcy is probably not our choice. Business partner changes are not our choice. But that doesn't mean that they aren't a good thing. While they may be painful at the time, it does help us kind of realign and figure out what we need to be doing and how to adjust. And then there's the regular small business stressors plus pandemic, changing mandates, everything with PPP, personal protective equipment. What is that? What do we need? When do we need it? And then it changes every day. Stalled workforce, additional payroll and cash flow issues, and just the constant uncertainty of what's going to happen day to day and how do you move forward and what do you do? We've got some BOAB folks from my group in this call, and we talk about this often. So, you're not alone, everybody else, that this is happening to everybody, and it's just part of the deal. So with chaos and with crisis and with challenge, gives you an opportunity for innovation and improvement and inspiration and some other I words that I didn't think of prior to now. It doesn't have to mean a new business idea, but it could mean a new business idea. It could be a new service or a new product that is in line with what your company already does. It could be a completely different company. It could be a rebrand. It could be a project that you've had on your list that you want to get done finally. It could be, any different number of things, and it's different for everybody. But, if I learned anything from the pandemic, it's that we had an opportunity among the crazy to, kind of look at some innovation or improvement or inspiration. A new product or service line helps diversify your business so that your revenues are not all in one basket, so to speak. I know there were some folks that started new businesses, which is great. That helps you personally diversify your money. Obviously, it may require some significant upfront capital. So depending on your COVID situation, that may or may not have been an option. Obviously, completing tasks and projects are great. they've been on your list for a while, it's always nice to check those things off. But it also helps kind of clean up and reorganize and all of that. So it could be reorganizing the office. It could be getting your taxes done on time for the first year ever, which is what happened to me in 2020. It was the first year since 2013 I didn't have to file an extension. So that was great. It could be a rebrand. It could be, taking some time off. It could be launching a podcast or redoing your website. There are a lot of different ways to create innovation, improvement, and inspiration. But I think what's important, not just with COVID, is to realize that when you're in crisis or when there is chaos, to kind of step back and really narrow down what the chaos or the crisis is, where is it coming from, and potential ways to obviously solve that, but then also what good could come from this. For example, I had a company, I own several companies, but I had a company that filed bankruptcy in 2019. At the time, that was devastating, obviously, and it was very stressful. It was very expensive. But what that did was allowed me to look at all the businesses separately, but look at their finances, their bank accounts, how we were set up from a business liability standpoint, our bookkeeping, our attorney structure, our legal structure, things like that. Obviously, I did not know that COVID was coming, but because the bankruptcy had been filed, we didn't have a choice. That company was gone. We had others that were separate and that they were doing well, but we wanted to ensure we didn't make the same mistakes with those. So by force, we had to take a deep dive into everything we were doing and really revamp and make sure that we're doing things the right way. It gave us a forced step to the side to kind of get things back in order. Now, the silver lining of that, and I believe that everything happens for a reason, but the silver lining of that is that when the pandemic hit, we had some time with the other businesses to get things realigned, figure out, all the things I mentioned, the process, the structure, the accounting, the legal, et cetera, et cetera. And we were in a much better position with those companies financially and just state of mind to take on the hit that COVID brought. I also had already gone through a bankruptcy, so it's a lot less scary when people say bankruptcy when you've already done it. It's a lot scarier the first time. Obviously, I don't ever want to do that again, and it's not something I would wish on anyone. But it did prepare me without me realizing it was coming. That to get these things lined out. So, innovation and improvement and inspiration and all that, it may not come by choice, and you may not realize it at the time, but there's always an opportunity. So kind of taking a look and seeing what those opportunities are when the chaos or the crisis or whatever it is happening, what can we do to get something positive out of this? With COVID, we had a lot of extra time. So looking at, redoing your website, launching a podcast. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I had a radio show that I'm sure at least 2 people tuned into every Thursday, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It was live, and I had a really hard time getting guests to join me because it was in person and early. So I put it on pause and launched a podcast a year later. So during COVID, it really gave me an opportunity to really hone in what I wanted that podcast to achieve and line up guests and have regular recordings so that we had regular content. And it was something that I didn't have as much time prior to COVID to plan out. So I utilized that time to do that. And I also, because I like to be super busy, enrolled in school again to get my MBA. So those were things that I did to innovate and inspire. Again, it's going to look different for everybody. So I think taking a look at your situation and what you want to achieve, what you need to achieve, what you have time for, is always ideal. Looking at business stopping, and stopping could be a pause, like for the pandemic, it could be a pause, like a permanent pause, like a bankruptcy. It could be a pause because your partnership or your ownership has changed. You're bringing on new partners, you're getting rid of partners. Any of you that have done that know that that's not the most fun. Anytime business stops, whether it's a permanent stop or a temporary stop for whatever reason, there's always opportunities again to kind of correct course. with the pandemic, and even if not, I mean, let's say there was another shutdown, or let's say that you're just taking a temporary pause. You want to make sure that you are staying involved in your business if it's something that's going to continue. Obviously, if it's a bankruptcy situation, then you need to stay involved because the court will want you to be involved, but you don't need to promote that company, obviously, because it's probably going away. But in the sense of the pandemic or any other temporary pause, it's always great to just kind of keep your face forward and remind folks that you're there. For me specifically, events stopped. They went on hold March 17th, and they're kind of back, but not really. And they certainly don't look the same. I don't like to be bored. I don't like idle time, but I also didn't, we were planning things with folks, but it's also a little hard to plan for a potential event that may or may not happen at a date that's undetermined with mandates that we don't know yet. So figuring out like, okay, well then what do I do in the meantime, other than field a lot of chaotic 911 calls? What do I do? How do I stay active? How do I stay in business? Obviously, our events, although they're very fun, they are not essential services. So we were one of the first things to get cut from folks' budgets, and we'll probably be one of the last things to come back, as people start to pick back up again. But in the meantime, I took the opportunity to continue to remind folks that I'm here. I was an advocate for, our industry and for small businesses. The city chamber, Commerce Lex, you can get involved. Obviously, all of you are involved, but you can get involved even more, either on their board or through their advocacy committees. And it could be you lobby for small business, you lobby for big business, you lobby for your specific industry. It could be anything. They need help, because the more voices you have in Frankfort, the more you're going to get something done. So I took it upon myself to get more involved in advocacy for the event industry. We do not have an association. So unlike, tourism or the bowling association, or, the brewers and distillers, all these folks have associations. I'm sure several of you do as well. They were all in Frankfort lobbying for their members for, updated mandate information, restrictions, things like that. We had nobody. So between Commerce Lex and the state chamber, I worked to help kind of get some of that resolved. I became a source of information for not only people in my industry, but for clients and others who were planning events. We offered event consulting, obviously virtually, for free. So someone could sign up for a 2-hour consult, and we would go through either the event that they had planned and figure out how they can pivot and, either reschedule or do it virtually or whatever, or we would help them decide to call it or push it, whatever. So we did that. Anyone that wanted to, they did not have to be a client of ours. We would schedule a 2-hour call. Now, what that did was it obviously gave me something to do, first and foremost, but also we got to help people that wouldn't normally have a budget for us. We also got to help people that we didn't normally have access to. We got calls from a lot of companies that aren't typically looking for event planners, but some of them, I think, down the line may end up calling us. And if they do, great. And if they don't, that's okay too. But it was nice for us to be able to get to still be creative and do what we do best, even though things were shut down. So, that was on the client side. Obviously, with our clients, we were posting a lot of information on our website. I personally had a lot of blog episodes about mandates, about restrictions, about everything. And it was small business related. It was event related. Obviously, there are only certain topics I can talk about, so I try to stick to those. But, I tried to be as much of a resource for information as possible. And that was for the industry as well. So with my positions with both the city and the state chamber and some of the advocating I was doing on behalf of our mandates being changed, I was getting information before it was being announced. Or I was getting more detailed information or whatever the case may be. So I would then share those details with other small business folks or event industry folks who maybe aren't tuned in or, aren't watching the news or whatever. So, I would kind of weekly send emails. I had an email chain with about 50, 60 small business owners that I would update regularly on PPP or, mandates or whatever. Obviously lots of podcast episodes. We had a blog post or a blog site on our website that was dedicated to COVID that, anybody, clients, industry, whoever could look at and find that updated information. Helping to spread information and resources, getting involved in advocacy, obviously being a source of information. This kept us busy, but it also gave us an opportunity while we were doing nothing else to stay top of mind. We did end up booking several clients who, some were folks that called us for one of the free consults. Some of them were not, and they saw a Facebook Live that we did with some other industry folks talking about the mandate changes and explaining some of the rules. Some of them, heard through this, through that, whatever, heard us on the radios, heard a podcast, whatever. So it kept us busy. It connected us to clients. It also reassured our current clients that we are involved. We're not going anywhere. We know what's happening. We're staying abreast of all the changes, and that we would know what was going on before they would know, or at least we wanted them to know that we were going to make sure we were I never wanted a client to feel like they had to call me to tell me about an event guideline change. I wanted them to know that I would call them 2 minutes before Andy's going to announce it on the 4:00 news. So I say Andy like we're friends, but I wanted them to know that we were a source of information and that we were on top of it. I also needed to reassure them without saying the words that we're not going to go out of business. I know there are some big businesses on here, and that may have not been a concern for you, but I see some other small business owners nodding their head. Yes, I'm sure a lot of us had concerns at one point or another, maybe multiple points, sometimes multiple points in the same day, that we weren't sure whether or not we were going to make it, or if we were going to make it, how are we going to make it? And then what are we going to look like when we come out on the other end? So, this was kind of our way of reassuring those clients and other industry folks that we weren't going anywhere, without saying on Facebook, like, hey, everybody, our bank account's fine. We got PPP. Please don't fire me. So this let them know, like, we're good. We're here. We're staying. We're paying attention. It is what it is. We'll get through it together. So, keeping in mind, obviously, you got to identify the crisis and the chaos. What is it? Where's it coming from? How do we start to fix it? And then look for innovation, inspiration, adjustments, etc. And then opportunities. What are the opportunities for you, for the business? How do you stay involved? How do you stay top of mind? Now, again, if it's a permanent pause, then that might be a little different, but for a temporary pause like the pandemic or something like that, it just keeps everybody comfortable. A lot of people will say, okay, so when we're talking about the pandemic, and we could be looking at masks and social distancing into 2022. There's a lot of contradictory information, which I'm sure we're all very tired of. Some of the information is slow to come, and sometimes it just doesn't come at all. So that's a hurdle that we all have to get over. And that's, big business and small business either way. But, while you're doing this, while you're pivoting, how do you protect yourself? How do you pivot and protect everybody else? What should you, what shouldn't you do? So, and obviously it's a little different for everybody. And, small businesses have issues with growing pains, cash flow issues, payroll issues, workforce, etc. Big business probably has a lot more regulatory issues that are changing, legislation. I'm sure they also have employee issues and workforce issues as well. So, figuring all that out obviously is step one, and it changes. So you have to be flexible, but pivoting, you want to make sure that you have disclaimers. If you're like us, obviously we do a lot of business with contracts. If you're a company that has contracts, then ensuring that you are looking through that to make sure now, before something else happens, that you've got all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. I think everybody in my industry hired an attorney on March 18th, and started looking through all the clauses and terms and force majeure and everything else. But ensuring that, you've got disclaimers, whether that's on your website, whether that's in a contract, whether that's a service order, whatever. If you're a product or a service-based business, you've got to have those disclaimers that, things are subject to change based on the mandates, that, you'll inform folks within X number of days of something, not happening or whatever. And it's going to be different for each business. It depends on who you are and what you do. But having those disclaimers, you'd think that it would be common sense, but it's just not. We all know that. And when we're in crisis, especially when the globe is in crisis, it's a little harder to kind of come back down for everybody to be rational about understanding that. Emotions are high, people are upset on both sides. So having that in writing, whether it be in your contract, your website, or what your invoice, it just helps. And the disclaimers could change often. Sometimes they change daily. But having that there will protect you, and it also protects your clients. I mean, let's be honest, that's the purpose of a contract. It's so that we all know what's happening. We're all on the same page. You know how you get paid. I know how I get paid. We know how we fire each other. We know when things are due. We know all of this. So there's no reason not to have all that in there as well. I would also suggest with that you leave certain things open. If you're going to put a disclaimer in that says, we're going to notify you within 10 days of a mandate change. You don't want to say, we're going to notify you 10 days from today if there's a mandate change, because there may not be one until day 11. So you want to make sure that it's very clear that you're going to give yourself X amount of notice from when you are notified to do that. And that's one example. Obviously, it would vary business to business and service versus product. But give yourself a little flexibility as far as when you're going to respond or when you're going to get back or provide the product or, whatever, so that they don't come back and say, well, you posted this disclaimer and you're 4 days late, because then that just causes extra frustration, and leaving it open. That kind of goes to the using definitive language. Obviously, you don't want to be so vague that no one knows what it is you're talking about. And it's not that you're not being fair to your client or your customer, and it's not that you're not being fair to yourself. You're trying to be fair and clear to everybody as much as possible. But when you use things as, we will, or we have, or, any kind of definitive language, if you are not following that to a T, you better believe at least one person is going to come back and call you on it. And right now, while tensions are high, there's a lot more threats of lawsuits and things of that nature. So just keeping that in mind. My next suggestion would be, once you've drafted all that up, to call your attorney and have them look through it and revise it. Right now, I know that finances are tight for a lot of people. So that's probably the first thought, is don't call these people, because you don't want to rack up a legal bill or, a bill for some other service provider. But I can tell you now is the best time to rack up those bills, because from someone who ended up having to file bankruptcy because I thought I could do it all myself, I'm not an attorney, so I actually don't know what those legal jargons mean, even though I like to think I do. And even, I've read some of the same contracts over and over and over. So there are some things on a contract that I do understand. There's still clauses that negate others that, because I'm not an attorney, I wouldn't catch it. So having your attorneys go through and look at either your addendum or your disclaimers, or, the blurb you're putting on your website, or a new contract, whatever it may be, just make sure, and not just attorneys, tax wise, with all the grants and, forgivable loans and all that, just make sure that you are talking to the professionals to ensure that you're doing it the right way. Because there is nothing more expensive than a lawsuit. And the attorneys get paid in a bankruptcy. They get paid first. So them and the tax guys, Uncle Sam and your attorney, they're going to get their money first. So you got to call your attorney. And then, next would be knowing your hard line. So I keep going back to events because that's what we do. But for us, we had a lot of people call and say, okay, I've booked your venue for this date. We're closed. You can't have our event. So what are we doing? Can we reschedule? Can we refund? Can we transfer, etc.? We came up with our rules for the pandemic, but those changed over time. So we never said, here is the final deal. We would say, here are the current rescheduling guidelines as of today. So if I send this to you today on February 23rd, and you don't call me back until April, the terms may have changed by then. In March and April and May of 2020, when we were still closed, we were rescheduling with no fees to any date. It did not matter. We were refunding partial payments for folks. We were being extremely flexible because, we were closed. There was nothing we could do. Once we announced our reopening, we still got some folks who felt more comfortable rescheduling, even though we were open. And so we let them do it, but we did charge a small fee. And then there was a certain parameter with a length of time where they could reschedule, after which they would have to kind of start over on their contract. And then, as mandates kind of grow and grow and grow, as far as allowing more and more people at events, we've tightened up a little bit. So we will let folks reschedule, but there's an even bigger fee. And we're getting to the point now where we're going to go back to not rescheduling without kind of starting over. Of course, unless, and we always give the disclaimer, unless case count starts to rise again, there's another shutdown, etc. There's always going to be an unless. Now, I think we all know that there are people who genuinely have been impacted. All of us have been impacted, but there are people who genuinely need some special extenuating circumstances because of COVID or whatever reason. But there's also some people who are hoping that they can use COVID or any other crisis you might be going through as a way to get some special favors. When our company filed bankruptcy, we had some vendors that we used for both companies that wanted us to pay their invoice over here. It's like, well, we're probably not gonna do that. So you want to make sure that you know your hard line. What are you willing to do? When are you willing to do it? How much are you willing to give? And then obviously being polite, but drawing that line. There's always exceptions to the rule, and that's fine. But being consistent and communicating that. The biggest thing is communication. Whatever your rules are, have it. I always save a draft in my email file so I can copy and paste that to the clients so that every single client gets the exact same wording. It's wording that's been vetted by our attorney. It has the rules on rescheduling and cancellation. It has the timing terms. It's got the payment terms, and I copy and paste it for, I put my initial email message to them, but then I say, here are the details below, and then I copy and paste it. So it's exactly the same. I'm being consistent. No two clients can come back and say that I have given one person one thing and someone something else. But there is the disclaimer at the bottom that says, as of today. So, if a second client calls back a month later, it might have changed. But I think communication is the biggest piece. We've found, especially in our industry is kind of bad sometimes about communicating anyways. But during the pandemic, and I'm sure I see some heads nodding, I'm sure we can all agree that, there are folks who are very stressed. I think we are all stressed, and no one knows what's going on, but it's okay to communicate and say, hey, we still have no changes. We have no updates, but I just want to let you know that we're still here. We're still doing this. We're still moving forward. For us, we would email saying, we're still open. We're still moving forward. We're still booking events. We will let you know when and if something changes. And you don't want to be annoying about it. You're not going to email people every day. No one wants that. But, once a month, once every couple of months. We email more frequently when the event industry gets a mandate change or a mandate update. And then when there are no updates, we don't really reach out unless someone contacts us directly. Because again, we don't want to annoy them. But, staying on top of communication, it just reassures them that you're not hiding, that you're not going out of business, that you don't want them to think that you're concerned. We probably all are concerned, but you don't necessarily want your client or your customer to know that. but just communicating and letting them know. And if the answer is you don't know, that's okay. Just say, I don't know, but we're listening to Andy at 4, except for today. We are, watching, we're waiting, we're this, we're that. So, and it's not always perfect. So sometimes you have to throw everything out that I just said and you got to just wing it, as long as you call your attorney first. So what do we do next? How do we move forward post-pandemic? I can't wait for the day that we don't talk about pivoting ever again, and unprecedented and all those words that we've loved in 2020. But, I do think, and I mentioned at the beginning, we are still going to be in a pandemic type state with mandates and masks and social distancing and things of that nature, at least through the end of this year, probably into 2022. What does that look like? How do we move forward as businesses in kind of this unknown? And obviously a lot of that we just discussed, but I think the biggest thing is that you have to just keep looking forward. Big business, small business, it doesn't matter. If you're I think we all know, if you're solely focusing on right now and today, you're probably not going to get very far. So I think planning for the future, doing your normal budgeting, doing your normal forecasting, whatever you do as a business for looking at future years and looking at the year you're in, you need to keep doing that. Start looking at your 3-year and your 5-year plan if you haven't updated that in a while, personally and professionally. Looking at employees and communicating with them on the potential schedule of bringing them back. There's always folks that are going to need information in that regard. But I think just starting to kind of get back in the habit of assuming that business is coming back, and that, while we may be masked, we'll at least have some semblance of normal-ish soon. I think that's the best thing that folks can do to keep things going. To be honest, some of the mandates that have happened, I hope stay, like hand washing and sanitizer. That would be great if that could just be a regular thing moving forward. Staff serve buffets. Let's be honest. Now that we think about it, 200 people touching the same spoon, it's probably not the most delicious thing ever, but we never thought about it before. So some of this stuff I hope stays, but so for us, we go ahead and look at our forecasting for the year. We're already looking at 2022, looking at the event schedule. What weekends do we have available for both the venues company and for the planning company? There are some concepts that we're going to introduce in 2022. So we're starting that process of getting those things lined out, looking at the budgets for those. Personally, I'm looking at ways that I can get involved in more podcasts, more interviews. I've got my podcast. I'm looking at that schedule going out through the end of the year, and trying to focus on, the podcast is about small business. It's not necessarily about COVID. We changed when COVID happened because we felt like the listeners wanted to talk about mandates and other small businesses shutting down and questions and things like that. But ensuring that my schedule for the rest of the year is relevant to what's going on, but also doesn't just talk about the pandemic. While I think we all are still very much involved and in the thick of COVID, I'm sure all of us are tired of talking about it, tired of hearing about it. Doesn't change that we have to deal with it. But I think, looking at, for me, at podcast episodes that are not related to COVID and are back to small business, because, business didn't stop. It may have been paused. We still had people calling, booking. It wasn't as much as it was in a non-COVID month or year, but people still called, and it's picking up. So, I think moving forward, obviously keeping those things in mind, applying for opportunities when they come as far as grants and loans and things of that nature, but, moving forward and planning for things as if eventually one day we will all be able to stand 1 feet apart from each other again. So, crisis, chaos, it's not just COVID related. It can be anything. So I think one thing we should take from the pandemic is these lessons we've learned about time and money, probably, and friendships and all of that, and remember that in 2021, 22 and on, when things open back up. So, there's a lot of things that we can tweak moving forward. This conversation is kind of kicking off a bigger conversation that we're going to have at Emerge. If you've never been to Emerge, it's normally in person, obviously, like every event, but it's business professionals of all types, small business, big business, business owners, business professionals. The chamber hosts it every year. It's March 9th this year, and it's going to be virtual, obviously. So in the past, they had several sessions, kind of larger sessions that everyone attended, and then you would kind of go off into breakouts. This year, everyone attending will kind of get the full day. So there's a workout at 7 a.m., virtually, of course, and then they're doing their kind of kickoff at 9, and then sessions throughout the day. There's a 4 p.m. kind of after party, so to speak, and they've got some great prizes that'll be given away during that. So you can pop in and out throughout the day if you want. You can tune in the whole day, but you get the whole session, and you can register for that on the chamber site. I do not know the cost. I'm really sorry, Liz. But we have a panel. I am hosting a panel for Emerge this year with several other business professionals talking about similar topics. These folks have done a killer job during the pandemic of pivoting, but looking at their business model and saying, okay, we're shut down, or we can't do this, or we can do it, but it's not anywhere near how we did it before. And these folks were insanely innovative and very creative in figuring out same things we already said. There you go. Liz posted the link in the chat box. Thank you, Liz. Staying afloat and staying top of mind with folks for their business. So, going from no food to food service dropped off at your door, no gyms, things like that. So I'd love for you guys to tune in there as well. You'll get to hear from all of them and their story, how they changed once the pandemic hit. And a lot of them are incorporating a lot of this in their business models moving forward, which will be really interesting to hear about. So hopefully you can join us for the whole day, but if not, the most important session is mine. Just kidding. Any questions that anyone has, you can put them in the chat box. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand, although I don't really know how that works. That's my child in the background. Jahida has picked him up from daycare. Any other questions? If you all are not in BOAB, I would highly recommend BOAB. It's obviously through the chamber. Nicole, who's on this, is the leader of our BOAB group, and Tammy and Lou and some others are in our group. And it's a great platform. It is for business owners, so you do have to be the owner of the business, but they put you in a group. It's a small group that meets once a month for a couple of hours, and it's great just to kind of have almost like a board of directors. Sometimes we vent about things. Sometimes we update each other about, mandates and regulations and things like that, even non-COVID related. Sometimes we get advice on different topics. I don't know if executive directors, Nicole, do you know if like Stephanie, would executive director, or Liz, you're on here?
It's pretty, as long as it's pretty specific to ownership.
Okay.
We do open it to like if you're a part owner or something like that. But
what about nonprofits?
It's kind of a yeah. If you're executive director of a nonprofit, yes. Like okay. I guess it just depends. Some of them we take case by case, and we say that because there's specific needs of owners that don't always translate to other roles in the company. Sure. So that's the reasoning for that. But yeah.
Thinking of horse country, we gotta get you in the group.
Yes, I linked the BOAB.
Can you link the BOAB?
I put it on there, but it ran into the Emerge one. So let me put that in there again. They don't really.
Yeah, if you're not in BOAB, I would highly recommend it. It's nice just to have a group of people that are doing, the same thing that you are. They have the same issues, cash flow, employees,
there's no
et cetera, that you kind of.
And you can fill out an application whenever you like and email it in. We try to only enroll a couple times a year so that we're not disrupting the groups too much, but we will be enrolling again this spring. So So feel free to fill out an application or, reach out to somebody who's part of it and see, because we're all in this together, and that's a great resource.
Thank you for that link.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, issues like to discuss?
Nobody speaks up.
Everybody's made lots of money during COVID and they have no problems.
I just want to say you did awesome, Kaelyn. And I mean, with my business, it was the opposite issue because I was too busy, but it's really a good way to just prepare for the future in case something does happen, because we're all vulnerable. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, and vulnerability, I think especially with contracts and certain businesses don't have contracts, that's not relevant. But I think one thing our industry realized during COVID was that, so if any of you have ever planned an event, I'm sure most of you realize that most vendors are small companies. Most of them are family owned. A lot of them do it as a part-time job, and a lot of them don't have contracts. Those of us who do have contracts realize that there were a lot of gaping loopholes in our contracts. So if nothing else came out of COVID, we realized that we needed to absolutely go back and really do a deep dive. My attorney and I spent, for one business alone, hours and hours and hours and hours. We rewrote the entire thing because A, the format was not great, but B, the details, certain clauses contradicted others. And there were some terms that made sense to me because I do this every day, but we realized that it probably didn't actually make sense to the people reading it, the client. There were a lot of things that need to be updated, just old regulations for our business that some of them weren't relevant anymore and some of them had changed dramatically. So, if nothing else came out of this, it was that we definitely needed to revamp our contracts, and not just for us, for our clients as well, because it protects them too, so that they know what to expect, when to expect it, how we're supposed to do it. But also it protects you, that way if something happens, you can come back and say, here it is in print. So I would highly recommend looking.
Do you recommend any attorneys that specialize in small business situations like this?
There are a lot of standalone attorneys that are great. I think it depends on your industry as well. Fun fact that I learned the hard way when I first started my business, not all attorneys are the same. My first business contract was drawn up by a real estate attorney who was a friend, and he was doing it as a favor, but I did not realize that doesn't translate to business corporate law. So definitely check your industry. I know that, Stahl Keenan and Dinsmore and some of those others have specific attorneys within their firm that specialize in equine law, or, so if Horse Country, they would probably need to look for someone who specializes in equine law, or Nicole, for you, a small business attorney that understands that, or you've got a lot of intellectual property, a lot of digital property. So somebody who knows a lot about that, since you don't have a physical product that you hand people. For me, I had to find somebody who knew about ABC laws and insurance law for events, especially. And some of the stuff she didn't know, but she learned it, for us. So I think finding an attorney that has someone that specializes in your industry is more important than who. Obviously, second would be who. Company. Then there's big companies, small companies. It all depends on your budget. They all have different hourly rates, but an attorney is better than, well, oh, never mind. I'm not going to say that. There are some, I've had some attorneys that were not better than no attorney. So I was just going to lie to you.
And we have a full list of chamber member attorneys on our membership directory. If you all want to use a member, we always promote supporting our members and getting a name from there if you can. So.
Absolutely.
Hey, Kaelyn, that was a great job. Do you know anything about the unemployment? Is everyone still getting that extra boost of unemployment?
The one that was happening every check?
Yeah.
I don't know the specifics. I know that the amount has dropped, but there is some legislation going back and forth on whether that will continue or whether that will drop off.
Okay.
We are going to be in Frankfurt on Thursday,
Mhm.
Small Business Day, so I will ask about that.
Yeah, I mean, we subcontract to people in all different states. So it's according to their state laws. And I thought maybe the boost was federal across the board. I wasn't sure, but that's a problem we're running into is our subcontractors are getting unemployment. And since our business has dropped, we can't promise them 50 or 60,000 a year. We can just say, well, we got a job every once in a while that you can do. And they're like, yeah, I'll just stick with my unemployment.
Yeah,
So,
I think we're all having that same issue with employees. You know, some of them are getting paid more on unemployment with obviously no schedule
mhm.
than they would if they were working. Or they're getting paid the same amount, but they don't have to actually go.
Right. And especially if you're working with artists are like, now I can actually work on my own line of work and get paid at the same time. So.
Exactly. Liz just put a link in the chat box with the attorneys that are members, if anyone wants to click that before the chat box goes away.
Yeah, and you can search through, we have a couple of categories of attorneys too. That's the main one, but if you go to the member directory and look under categories, there's like attorneys / real estate, attorneys / thing. So
yeah,
feel free to look around.
Morgan made a great point about contracts, that they've spent a lot of time looking at their agreements and all of that, saying, you know, be flexible but firm while things are uncertain. And that's a great way to put it, flexible but firm. You know, and at the end of the day, I mean, especially for us, we've had a lot of people say, well, I don't want to have my event anymore, or I went ahead and got married and I don't want to have the reception anymore, even though they've rescheduled 3 or 4 or 5 times. And so, you know, when you explain it to folks, when I explain it to them that, you know, I'm happy to be as flexible as I'm able to be, but 2 things. One, you know, I am holding up my end of the deal. I am holding a date for you. I am working on your event. I don't have a physical product. That is my product. So I need to be compensated for that. But 2, you know, you want me to keep pushing your date and pushing your date and pushing your date, but you don't want me to charge a fee. I have to actually still be in business when your date rolls around 6 years from now, when you want to actually have it. So, you know, if I push everybody with no fee, I'm giving you all these dates for the same price as one. So for example, at Limestone Hall on any given Saturday for about 150 people, it's about just shy of $5,000. Well, we've got some folks that we have given 4 or 5 Saturdays for the price of one for their original date. We didn't charge them a fee to change. And now we're at the point where they're just changing, or because they want to push until there's no mask mandate. And I get it. Nobody wants to wear a mask, period, let alone at an event, especially a wedding. However, you know, I don't know when mask mandates are going to be done. And I can't, I mean, we've got some clients we've given $25,000, $30,000 worth of dates, and we're never going to recoup the money because once the date passes, I can't sell it anymore. And I've held it for them. So when you explain that to folks, they understand, you know, those hard numbers, they understand. And I just tell them honestly, like, look, you know, I'm not worried about being in business right now, but if I let you move, I have to let everybody move. And if I give everybody $30,000 worth of dates, I am not going to be here next month, let alone in 2022 when we finally have your event. So charging a small fee is how we are fair to you. We're not charging you twice, but it's how we're fair to us and to KU because they won't let me not pay my bill. So firm, but flexible, but firm. That was a great point, Morgan. Thank you.
Kaelyn, this is Robert Ryan. I'm a business and commercial real estate attorney with Wyatt. And so I do recommend that people look at their contracts because so many times when we look at a contract, you think it says one thing. And
Yes.
it probably sounds like you found out that that might be the case. And it to somebody else, and particularly a judge, if you ever have to explain it to a court or a judge, what it means, because the judges will interpret what they think the language says. And so you want to make sure that those contracts say what you think they say and have the provisions in them, because it's hard to explain to a client when they come in and they say, well, this says this. And as you said, the provisions may say something totally different, or there may be conflicting provisions. So it's a word of the wise for everybody to check all those. I know a lot of people don't like to go to attorneys unless they have
It's
to.
worth it.
But it's easier and cheaper to do it on the front end than it is to deal with it on the back end when you're in a fight with someone over your money or a contract or something like that. So that's good advice.
Yep, the business that I referenced earlier that filed bankruptcy, we were in a very long, multi-year legal battle in California because I did not understand what a venue clause meant in a contract. And it said that if we litigated in California, and I did not cross that off and write Kentucky because the work happened here, but their office was based in California. So as Robert can probably tell you, it's very expensive to litigate, period, let alone litigate from another state. So we had to hire an attorney in California to represent my attorney in Kentucky to represent me, which meant I paid 2 hourly rates every time we had a call, a meeting, court, anything. I'd get on the phone and say, okay, ladies, I can afford 30 minutes total. Tell me what you got. So, and then eventually it got to be too expensive. We couldn't afford it anymore. So everybody call Robert because it sounds like he can help you with your contracts.
And you need to watch, because a lot of people think too that avoiding court with mediation and arbitration provisions are the best. But mediation is good, but arbitration can be more expensive than court. And because it depends on how that arbitration provision is written. So they're not always the best. So you always need to talk to your attorney about that as well. If you're going to get into a contract that has a binding arbitration provision, you want to make sure you understand what you're getting into.
So everyone, when you get off here, look at your contract, see if it has a clause in there about binding arbitration, and then delete it and call Robert.
Because a lot of times in binding arbitration, you have to pay the arbitrator, obviously. And some of those bigger arbitration agreements have up to 3 arbitrators. And it may be, I've been involved in a situation where people had to go to Washington, D.C. to arbitrate the case. So it can get expensive and involved. And so just know what's in your contracts.
Great points. Thank you.
All right, if there's no other questions, we will hop off here. This is recorded, so we will make it available on our website at some point, or we'll try to share it on Facebook, and we'll try to get it out there. If you would like a recording of it, just send me an email, and I'm happy to shoot it to you that way as well. So, or give you the link.
Hopefully we'll see you all at Emerge on March 9th.
Don't miss it. It's going to be a great time. Thanks, everybody.
Go on.
Thank you.